Hey, welcome back to the Endless Man Formula, and in this module, I'm going to teach you about mastering your penis. And mastering your penis, similar to mastering your ejaculation, is something that will take some time and effort, but once you get this handled, you'll be able to get the results you're looking for even quicker than before. So let's go ahead and get started. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about understanding our triggers. So we have a lot of triggers in ourselves that cause us to ejaculate or have erectile dysfunction or other problems. And this also holds true for women as well. Some women have triggers that turn them on, and some women have triggers that help them orgasm faster. So I'll share that tip a little bit later, but there's triggers in all people. And women also have triggers that instantly turn them off as well. And you've probably experienced that before. And the trigger itself could be problems that you have in bed or something that you say or do. So we're going to go through this presentation covering mostly about triggers. And triggers are a huge thing that I find not covered in a lot of other courses. So let's go ahead and get through to it. But before that, I'm also going to show you the exercise that made me and many other men endless in bed. So this is like the exercise combined with the previous ones that you've gone through that actually has helped me make sure that I don't even ejaculate during sex. Now, it doesn't mean I don't ejaculate, and it doesn't mean that I can always stop it every time. Generally, about 90% of the time, I have control of it, and I can be endless in bed. And when I say 90%, sometimes if the woman's on top, she likes to go hard at it. So that makes it difficult to hold it in if she's on top and she's being rigorous about it. But beyond that, this is something that once you have handled will help you become endless in bed. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk about triggers. So this is one of the biggest causes of premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction I mentioned in the last module. So what exactly is a trigger? It's something that's usually psychological, and even if it's physical, it's something that, like, let's say that the physical trigger is that you ejaculate. Well, there's a psychological trigger that could cause that as well, which could be cause, worry, anxiety, and other items. Triggers is something basically that can cause you to do things. Like, as I mentioned before, like my brother knows how to make me angry really quickly, so he knows the buttons to push to trigger my anger. And some women, the longer you're with them, will figure out the buttons they need to push to make you ejaculate. Sometimes you have to make them not push those triggers, but first you have to figure out what your triggers are. So how do you figure the trigger out? Well, there's a couple things you can do. Let's go ahead and cover that. So figuring out your triggers. So let me tell you about my old and sometimes current triggers. So a specific thought or something I imagine while I'm inside my partner. I could have a specific thought about maybe specifically ejaculating, and then I ejaculate inside of her. And, that itself is a trigger, or thinking about a specific image of before when I've ejaculated before. Also, anxiety about how long I would last before, during, and even after sex. The trigger itself before sex might be that I'm worrying about how long I'm going to last, because maybe last night I lasted shorter. And then during sex, I'm just worried about what I'm lasting, so I just keep worrying about that, and then I ejaculate. Well, let me tell you a little story about cars were statistically hitting light poles in snowy driving conditions more than they should have. So in snowy conditions, they were hitting light poles a lot more than they should have. And there's a big psychological reason for it. Because when these people were sliding and skidding and losing control of their car, what they would say in their mind, and what they told the researchers, was they say, don't hit the light pole, don't hit the light pole. Well, the thing about our brains is we don't hear the word don't. So when they're skidding towards hitting that light pole, well, they hit it because their brain was focusing and only hearing, hit the light pole, hit the light pole. So they statistically did something that was impossible to, like, not really impossible, but more improbable, where they were hitting it that often. Like, there was football fields between these light poles, and people would hit them more often than they should, according to the light pole. So some of them were not even near the light pole, and they're like, don't hit the light pole, and they're going towards the light pole, and that's what they're focusing on. If we focus on not ejaculating during sex, well, don't ejaculate, don't ejaculate, don't ejaculate, well, a lot of things what happens is we do ejaculate, and that causes problems in sex. And that's one of my biggest triggers before, is I would worry about not ejaculating, and as much as I tried to not avoid it, to avoid it, I still did it anyway, and I wondered why. And also a specific thought about a time that I ejaculated or a specific movement by my partner. So this is what I was talking about a little earlier, that sometimes I would envision previously where I've ejaculated before. And for example, this is going to sound weird, but it's true. Like I meditate, and I've had a partner of mine before would actually sometimes want to, well, give me a blowjob while I'm meditating. And when I was doing one of the natural masturbation exercises, I actually sort of thought of that thing and just ejaculated without even expecting it. Literally triggered within 5 seconds of thinking that thought, of thinking her give me a blowjob while I'm meditating. And that exactly happened. So that was a specific trigger. It could also be a specific movement by your partner. So if she's grinding in a certain way or moving, or if she's really good at moving her PC muscles inside of her, that could also cause a trigger for you to ejaculate as well, giving you a specific sensation on your penis as well. So this is how I've had my triggers, and I'm aware of these things because I've experimented with them and experimented with my partners as well. So let me go ahead and cover a little bit about how do you figure out your triggers. Before that, these triggers hide under our consciousness. Sometimes it's very difficult to figure them out. And what do I mean by hiding under our consciousness? Well, something that we don't even think about consciously, it's like in our subconscious, of things we're trying to avoid or things that happen to us without our input in our conscious brain. So as I told you before in the previous module, we have something that animals don't have, which is the conscious brain, and that allows us to place scenarios in our head. But we also have something called the unconscious or subconscious, where before we make a decision, our subconscious brain has made the decision for us a few seconds before, or split seconds before we made a decision. So which means we're not truly in control of ourselves if we allow our subconscious to direct our actions. So these triggers can hide in our subconscious, and sometimes it just causes us to ejaculate without knowing why. And our body already decided to ejaculate without our conscious involvement with it. But a lot of the stuff we've been doing is starting to take control of this unconscious trigger that a lot of us have in us. So once we get control of this trigger, we're able to reprogram the trigger to where it doesn't ejaculate. And that's what this exercise in this module will be about. So the best way to know what a trigger is when you actually ejaculate. That sounds weird, right? You have to actually ejaculate to know what your trigger is. Well, now you're conscious of what these triggers could be, and the next time that you ejaculate, you'll be able to figure out what the trigger was. May have been enough sensation, may have been specific something she did or a thought that you had that really turned you on so much that you just had to ejaculate, and maybe your breathing and other things. But if you don't know this, I've actually been training you through all these exercises away from these triggers. Like a lot of the things, like the breathing is very important because a lot of people have shorter breathing right when they're getting ready to ejaculate. If you can subconsciously make your breathing the endless breathing, you'll be able to increase how long you last and prevent ejaculation altogether. And that's the same thing for a lot of other things as well. So the best way to find out what your triggers are is when you actually ejaculate. Pay very close attention, be in the moment, but pay very close attention to those things. So let's say that you were masturbating or having sex and then suddenly the urge to ejaculate comes. What caused it? Was it a thought, a specific image, or fatigue from sex? So what is it? So we covered a little bit about fatigue and master your body, of how to get out of your fatigue using the specific exercises I told you. So what caused it? Was it a thought, a specific image, a specific movement? What caused the ejaculation? So you're going to go through an exercise to really figure that out. And we're going to use our visioning exercise to actually figure that out. And what I want you to do is take 30 minutes out after this module. Yeah, 30 minutes might seem like a lot of time. So whenever you have 30 minutes, take some time. And in a quiet place where you won't be bothered for 30 minutes, close your eyes and envision when you are with your partner or masturbating. What specifically triggers you to ejaculate in those situations? Like literally imagine like looking down and maybe you're thrusting your woman and thinking, okay, and you're about to ejaculate. Think about what's causing that. Like what specific image. Try to figure out what that trigger is. And also envision what triggers you during masturbation as well. So what thoughts and sensations, all that other stuff. Keep that in your mind when you're doing this exercise. Just envision it, literally envision it, put yourself in the situation, and then actually take this situation and actually put it into practice and feel your triggers physically. Now, over time, your triggers will reduce with the exercise I showed you last module and this module, so natural masturbation and this exercise, then you'll be able to get sort of reduce those triggers as much as you can as possible. So changing your triggers. So many of us train for years and years to make our sensation on our penis means we must ejaculate. And that's exactly what I have done for decades, and a lot of other men I've worked with, and you might as well. So we've trained our penis to ejaculate after having sensations on it, and that's sort of been programmed into our brain. And that's why a lot of us deal with premature ejaculation problems in themselves, because we actually have to deal with that because we programmed our brain to do that, and we didn't even know that. Nobody helped us with that. No one told us that when we were younger. But now I'm telling you, we're going to reprogram that part of your brain, and which we've been doing, but we're going to do it even more, even faster now with you having all the skills you have. So many of us train that way, so we're going to have to change that. Specifically, when we were young, as I've mentioned, we'd masturbate for the pleasure and the short-term orgasm before ejaculation. So that's specifically what we did when we were younger. And maybe even now, which I've made you aware of. So awareness is the first step to really change, which I'm making you aware of a lot of things as well. And did you know that ejaculation and orgasm are different things? You can orgasm without ejaculating. And you can actually ejaculate without orgasm as well. And I've experienced those before. They're not fun because you don't really experience any pleasure. Ejaculation and orgasm are different. They're different things. An orgasm comes milliseconds before ejaculation. And if you don't believe that, well, you'll start believing that as soon as you're doing this exercise because you'll experience it yourself. And sometimes you'll cross over that point. But once you understand this point, you're going to be able to develop the skills necessary to be endless in bed and be multi-orgasmic as well. So orgasms come milliseconds before ejaculation, sometimes actually a few seconds before ejaculation, but usually it's milliseconds. And you have to decrease sensations at specific time frames, as I've mentioned before, to really experience the orgasm without the ejaculation. So this next exercise is vital. And when I say vital, it's just very important to the Endless Man formula altogether. And if you can get this one as much practice as you can get better and better at it. This is to transforming your triggers. And the triggers is something that we all deal with. Even the best men who last the longest, we have to deal with triggers. Now, there is some men who are desensitized so much that they can't really enjoy sex. And I'll just be honest with you, that's a lot of circumcised men, that they don't experience it as much as non-circumcised men, which is true. There's been studies about that, where it destroys nerve endings and other things. But beyond that, most everybody has triggers. And I know people who have the opposite triggers where they can't ejaculate because of past trauma. So there's both types of triggers. Triggers that make you ejaculate and triggers that make you don't ejaculate when you want to. And they both are bad for us in the long term.